For anyone who told you blood is thicker than water, tell them to take a hike. I've been through so much family drama that I can't even look at my brother, Remy, ever again. And if I'm being honest, I wouldn't have it any other way after all the terrible things he's done. It all starts with his wife, Rosa. Well, my ex-wife and my current girlfriend. I know that sounds bad, but there's a lot that went on between me and Remy. I didn't steal his wife from him. Honestly, I'd barely interacted with Remy before. What happened? And the reasons for that? Well, we're just very different as people. Credit where it's due, Remy was a very driven person, even from an early age. He always wanted to succeed, always wanted to win first place in science fairs, become student council president, and things like that. Chronic overachiever, basically. I was no slouch either, but I often lost out when my morals were questioned. I've always been a firm believer in karma. I don't think that the ends justify the means in any situation. My parents are more pragmatic and Remy is extremely pragmatic. While I would get chided by for not living in the real world mom and dad, Remy would often rub his ill-gotten successes in my face to show that my way of living was pathetic. Like for example, we both went to the same high school, and both of us liked debating. Remy somehow became the president of the debating society as a freshman. As for me, I didn't even get a position on the council during my time in the club, narrowly losing out to a girl named Priya. But I didn't begrudge her for it, and we both often debated together. I won't get into details, but Remy's council position came because he found out that the person running against him was cheating on his girlfriend. He then blackmailed him over that to get the win. The thing is, I would never have known except that he casually mentioned when I lost to Priya, saying that's what I needed to do, think ahead to get ahead. Remy was a college student at MIT at this time and took to telling me more and more about incidents like these to explain his success. For me? It just left a sour taste in my mouth. Apart from that, I also saw him fall in with the wrong crowd, the kind that talked about being an alpha in life. While it was a coping mechanism for most of the jerks Remy hung out with, I knew he was capable enough to do something with his life. Obviously, with such different approaches to life, the two of us split apart after high school. I got a scholarship and went to Amherst, while Remy finished his degree and began to work in fintech. In college, I definitely found my calling. I understood that people come from different backgrounds and tried to understand different cultures. Looking back on it all, I did some stereotypical college kid things like taking a gap year, trekking across Latin America, yada yada. But by the end of it, I got a job working in DEI in a large company. As for Remy, he made enough money from software development in a few years and eventually quit to start a contracting business in our hometown. Every family reunion became grating because my brother would constantly try and compare us. The ironic part is that I was making pretty good money. But because nobody in my family understood what HR does or even the full form of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, by the way, I was always considered the son with wasted potential. It felt like my parents didn't care that I was happy doing what I loved and that I was making a change in the company I worked at. It just didn't sound as impressive as, "Oh, did you hear? Remy's business is doing so well. He may buy a space to turn into an office." Remy also began to become more cruel and bigoted, often making jokes about Mexican laborers and how he wanted a wife who wouldn't have a big mouth. So eventually I talked to my parents less and less. Since I was mainly living in the city and Remy was living in our hometown, he was closer to them, and I felt like an afterthought at most family events. We did follow each other on social media though, and I could see him liking the weirdest stuff ever on Instagram. Barring all that, the next time I really had to spend any time with my family was at Remy's engagement. It came as a shock to everyone in the family because we hadn't ever met the girl, and even people close to Remy didn't really know who this mystery fiancé was. It turns out that it was a Peruvian girl whom he had met during a business trip. Remy was planning on expanding to South America, and Rosa, the girl, worked at one of the bars he was visiting. When I first saw her at the engagement party, I understood why Remy was smitten. She was pretty. Like model pretty. At the same time, I was surprised to see my hard-nosed brother do something so romantic, meeting someone in a bar and proposing so quickly. Based on how he looked at all his relationships as matters of convenience, this was definitely out of character. But it turned out to only be romantic at face value. Remy was the typical chauvinistic husband and belittled Rosa and her culture all the time. The few weeks they spent at my parents' place before the wedding planning, I tried to make small talk with Remy at the kitchen counter and walked away disgusted. "So, are you excited for the wedding?" "Excited?" Yeah, sure, more for the honeymoon if you know what I mean. Okay. And how come Rosa's family isn't coming to the wedding? I didn't see anyone unfamiliar on the guest list. Yeah, about that. I don't like them that much and neither do they. Besides, her parents don't have enough money to visit, haha. Dude, you could easily afford to pay. Do you not care? I'm just marrying Rosa, man, not her family. Besides, it's not like it matters after we get married. I'm not going to stay in Peru of all places. I stormed off after that and had to grin and bear it through the wedding. After the formalities were over, I distanced myself from my family yet again. This was in 2017, about 7 years ago. Just before the pandemic hit, I got the chance to shift to a remote position, and it even came with a significant pay hike. I was pretty excited about the whole thing and decided to use some of my extra income to buy a house in my hometown. After searching through a few websites, I ended up reaching out to a friend of mine from high school who was a realtor. Overall, just a really sweet guy. He reminds me of Phil Dunphy, haha. Anyway, I got a great deal on a fixer-upper house in a cul-de-sac and decided to spend a couple of weeks back home to figure out how I'm going to renovate the place. I'm still not set on whether I want to flip it or settle down there, but I did have a strong attachment to my childhood memories and had begun to grow disillusioned with living in the big city. I broke the news to my parents, tentatively. They were really positive about the change, and to my surprise, didn't mention anything about my brother. I knew from social media that he had just bought a huge townhouse in a fancy neighborhood. I was dreading comparisons but didn't get any flack from my parents. After arriving at the airport, I figured out the reason my parents weren't talking about Remy that much anymore. Dad sullenly drove, with a vein popping in his forehead, while Mom told me all about how Remy had forgotten about them. Despite never moving away, he didn't keep in touch with them and had become a debauched kind of businessman, going to wild parties and being generally viewed as a bad person by everyone. When Mom and Dad expressed that they didn't like the way he was going, Remy just told them that he wasn't answerable to them and then had a shouting match with Dad. It culminated in him saying that he was making 100 times the amount. Dad made it in his life in a year. After that, my parents hadn't really spoken much with my brother, although Mom still insisted that I let him know I was going to be in town for a while. Against my better judgment, I did text Remy about it and he invited me over to his house one weekend. Visiting Remy's house was like visiting a palace. His house looked like something I would see in a Beverly Hills reality show. When I arrived, he wasn't even at home, but Rosa was there to greet me. I caught up with her and asked her how she was enjoying America and had an interesting conversation with her. Anytime I asked her about how things were with Remy, though, she would change the topic. Finally, after Remy arrived, we sat down for dinner together. It was really awkward. Things started with my brother questioning my house purchase, offering unneeded and unasked for advice, and then finally shrugging off my milestone as a decent buy. I also noticed how he would constantly talk over Rosa and never let her speak. When I said something along the lines of "let her speak, dude," he blew a fuse at me. What do you mean? Are you telling me how to talk to my wife? You're not talking to anyone, you're just talking over people. It's kind of obnoxious. Come on, Rosa's barely been here for a few years. What would she know? I'm trying to give you advice on that shell of a house you bought. She gets it. Besides, she does not comprehend English that well, haha. It's just rude. You're one to talk. I invited you to my house despite the fact that you've not been back home in so long. You're going to be working for someone your whole life while I'm out here creating business. What? How is that relevant to you speaking over people? Come on, dude. I think you should leave. Good luck with your new house. That's a pretty good snippet of how Remy behaves. If you ever criticize him, he just brings up his success and tries to put you down. It wasn't worth my time to argue with him, so I just left. I went back to my parents and told them about it. They rolled their eyes as if they had been through it 1,000 times before. In the weeks that followed, I figured out more about how my brother was viewed by our town. Everyone had stories to tell about him. None of them were good. Apparently, he frequently went to clubs with a different girl on his arm, drank like a fish, and had gotten into fights with old mom and pop stores over land and business. Despite all the money he had, he wasn't well liked. This was definitely a surprise for me. I had been away for a long time, and the last time I was really in touch with people back home was when Remy had just quit his software job and started working on his contracting business. Back then, people were thinking about how much positive change he was going to bring to our small town. Instead, they're treating him like an evil Mr. Scrooge. To be honest, I didn't really disagree with them. Putting aside the unpleasantness with my brother and welcoming my newfound closeness with my parents, maybe closeness is too strong a word, more like mutual disappointment with Remy, I began working on renovating my new house. As you can imagine, my tentative plan had to become pretty rock solid after the Rona struck. I wanted to make sure I was close by in case something happened to my parents and didn't want to take the risk of going back to the city. So, I decided to make the best of it and move into my half-renovated home. It wasn't as bad as I'm describing it to be. The kitchen and bedroom were done, and the only things that were left were the study room, the upstairs bathroom, the guest room, and the basement. I wasn't going to have any guests over anyway. In the middle of the pandemic, I was woken up one night by my doorbell ringing. Instantly on edge, I walked over to the front door and peeked outside. To my surprise, Rosa was outside, dressed in a tiny dress that had one of its straps ripped. "Peter, I need your help. Please let me come inside." Hey, is everything all right? Are you hurt? Come in." "I'm not hurt, but oh, it's all so bad." Rosa could barely hold in her tears, and as soon as she crossed the threshold of my house, she started crying. "Oh, Peter, I don't know what to tell you. Your brother wanted me to do something very bad." "Very bad? What do you mean? Did he do this to you?" "Not him, one of his friends. He was a very drunk, very angry man. A big business partner for Remy. He wanted me to sleep with this man." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I remember that night so clearly even now, finding out just how evil my brother really was. This went beyond wild parties and off-color jokes. This was legitimately disgusting. I comforted Rosa and she told me that she would tell me about what happened later. At that moment, all she needed was a promise that I wouldn't give her back to Remy, something I obviously agreed to. I set her up in my bedroom and wondered about how I would go about helping her. A few hours after midnight, I got a call from Remy, obviously drunk. A few people were yelling and laughing in the background, clearly having a party. "Hey brother, I need to ask you something. Is my wife with you?" "No. Why would you think that?" Oh, forget about it." Okay, what the heck, I'll tell you. Why, see, I'm having a bit of a get-together at my house tonight. Bunch of international clients, a few from South America. I told you about my expansion, right? Multi-million-dollar opportunity, you know. Cut to the chase, Remy. It's almost sunrise. Oh, say it ain't so. Anyway, one of the people was from Peru, so I thought that Rosa would like to speak to someone in her mother tongue. I asked her to be a good host, and I don't know why, but she took it the wrong way. Stormed off to the bedroom. Is that what really happened? Well, I don't know, man. Maybe she just got tired of being treated like dirt. Where would she go? Back to Peru. Just tell me if she showed up at your house or not. No, she didn't. I could smell Remy's BS from a mile away. Clearly he wasn't telling me the full story, but Rosa had fallen asleep and I didn't want to wake her up and worry her. I fell asleep on the kitchen floor that day, and the next morning woke up to Rosa making us coffee. Then I told her about the phone call last night. She made a face and began speaking. Remy is lying. He didn't have a party and suddenly discovered that his friends were from South America. In fact, he had told me about this last weekend, that I was going to be the main attraction for his friend. He told me that I had to sleep with him, otherwise he would divorce me. That's terrible. Does he not care about any of this at all? No, to be honest, Remy does not love me at all. After our honeymoon, it only took him a few months to get tired of me. I found out he was having an affair, and he threatened to get me deported if I spoke up about it. He has a reputation to maintain, he says. Reputation? Hey, that's the funniest thing I've heard. Everyone in town hates his guts. Well, they would hate him more if they knew what I knew. But what can I say? El Tonto wouldn't let me escape. It was either live with his infidelity or be sent back to Peru. I would not even mind going back home, but he has cut me off from my family for so long, and I do not know whether they would accept me if I went back. I married him in a rush, and now I'm paying for it. AW Rosa, that's terrible. I hope that you know that my parents and I will be on your side. We didn't know that things were so bad. Thank you for saying that, Peter. After we had a heart-to-heart, I called my parents and told them the full story. Obviously, a very hungover Remy had also given them his side of the story, and I could sense that my parents were reluctant to believe anyone over the other. They also thought that I was getting unnecessarily involved by lying about having Rosa at my place. Sure enough, it turned out that Mom told Remy that Rosa was at my house. That afternoon, despite everyone being told to stay at home, Remy came over to my front doorstep and demanded to speak to Rosa. Legally, I could turn him away, and I did just that. A shouting match ensued, and he yelled that he would make sure that Rosa got what was coming to her. I took stock of the situation. My brother's wife had nowhere to go and didn't have many resources either. On the other hand, Remy had enough money and pull to get whatever he wanted done. Things weren't looking good. The pandemic slowed down any legal battle that could have taken place, and Rosa asked if she could live in my house for the time being. I agreed, and we became a pair of really awkward roommates. At the same time, Remy filed for a divorce and immediately rushed to try and get Rosa deported. The US green card system is vast and complicated, and here's where Rosa wished she had a conditional green card. Since she and Remy had been married for a bit under 2 years, she wasn't a permanent resident of the United States. Usually a couple has to file a joint petition after these 2 years to prove that the marriage is in good faith, and then the foreign spouse gets permanent residence. To the best of my knowledge, divorce after that doesn't influence citizenship. Obviously, Remy wasn't down to file that petition. There was a waiver to this whole process, but Rosa wasn't sure about taking that path. Things took a long time to get sorted, and Rosa and I lived together in that house for almost 2 years. Despite having been a housewife for Remy, and, in his words, just a pretty face, I discovered that Rosa was the woman of my dreams. She was smart, funny, and had a lot of curiosity and ideas about the world. We often used to stay up talking until late at night, even though our friendship was going to be temporary. I had offered to find immigration attorneys who could help Rosa file for the waiver. After all, the marriage had been entered into out of good faith, and she didn't marry Remy for citizenship, but she decided that it wasn't worth it to fight to stay in the US, especially when she had no support system. Instead of throwing all her money away, she was going to try and start life again back home in Lima. During her time at my house, she had started speaking to her family more often and had gotten over her fear of being ostracized after returning home. After travel restrictions were lifted, Rosa was deported back to Peru. My parents and family seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief after all. The drama was over. Remy was even more hated than he was before because his lifestyle and the reason for the divorce had become an open secret. At the same time, nobody chose to call him out on it and still interacted with him. I was the only one who wouldn't bother looking at him, no matter how much he threw his money and power around. I kept in touch with Rosa online. She had started a cloud kitchen and was doing super well for herself. I got busy fixing up the whole house, and the story should have ended here, except I had fallen in love with Rosa. I know it's taboo, and I also know that I was stupid for repressing it, but I think our time together at home made me fall in love with her. Like I said, she was the perfect woman for me. I hadn't told her how I felt while I was in the US, and it felt like now I wouldn't have a chance. This was a dark time for me. I began to wallow in self-pity. My parents tried to cheer me up by looking at the whole thing pragmatically. It would have been too complicated to pursue Rosa, and Remy would definitely have made my life hell. I tried to believe them, but it just wasn't working out for me. After a lot of soul-searching, I realized that I needed closure, if not anything else. I decided to go to Peru and meet up with my brother's ex-wife, if only to tell her how I felt. Around this time, Remy also began to struggle a lot. The pandemic had hurt his business, and his divorce had finally taken his reputation beyond a tipping point. People outside our family weren't interacting with him at all. In fact, even within our family, a lot of people were finally cutting Remy out of their lives. Most of the business partners he had made turned out to be fair-weather friends, and his deals began falling down like dominoes. I wasn't involved in any of this, it just happened. But like I said, I'm a big believer in karma. I had other things to focus on, to be honest. I went to Peru and asked Rosa to meet up. We went to a small cafe and started talking. It felt like those months we spent together in my half-finished home, and finally, I worked up the courage to tell her how I felt. Rosa, I need to tell you something. You're the most interesting, amazing, and kind-hearted person I've ever met. When I'm with you, things just feel light. Like there's nothing that can keep me down and nobody that can hold me back. I wanted to ask if you would be interested in just one more coffee. A date, this time? Peter, that is very sweet. I also feel the same way, but I am very scared. I fell in love with a man and he ruined me. I don't want that to happen again. I mean, know that you are not like your brother. But I find it difficult to trust men these days. Listening to Rosa, I realized that I had been acting selfishly too. I mean, anyone would be scared of relationships after the BS she was put through. I was blinded by my attraction to not even consider that. Rosa, you're right. It wouldn't be right to ask you to be in a relationship with me so soon after what Remy put you through. But I enjoy your company a lot. This sounds crazy, but if I stayed here, would we be friends? Yes, Peter, but you can't do that. Your life is back home. Was my life back home? That was the question racing through my mind. My parents were critical of Remy without standing up to him. I wasn't very close to that many people. The only thing I could think of was that I would miss my hometown. But at the same time, living in Peru would be an exciting opportunity for me to explore a different culture. I needed to think it over and realize that I couldn't do something so sudden just for Rosa. I had to do it for myself. I broke the news to my parents, and they were shocked. They didn't stop me from following through with it, though. I guess they knew they had no right to convince me. I managed to sell the house for a pretty nice profit to a young couple. My job also didn't pose any problems, and I was able to enjoy life in South America. I've been living here for almost a year now, and it's been really great. Last month, Rosa asked me out on a date, and I accepted. We're officially a couple now, and we're going to do things the right way. We're taking things really slow and not rushing into anything. There are a few hurdles, of course. Rosa is finally getting close to her family again, and they don't view me in a very good light. At least her parents don't. I mean, who can blame them? I'm related to the same guy who whisked their daughter off to another country and then treated her like dirt. But I'm in the good books of all her cousins. Honestly, when I do interact with her family, something I was doing even before Rosa asked me out, they see that I'm nothing like the person Remy is. They don't judge me based on my frankly evil brother. Speaking of my evil brother, something happened after I moved to Peru. He was arrested for tax fraud. It was a huge scandal and even made headlines across the state. With Remy in legal and financial trouble, a lot of people were less scared to talk about how he would bully smaller businesses or just be a terrible person in general. These anecdotes and stories made the rounds in our hometown. I get that it was hard for Mom and Dad to hear all this stuff, but they never clearly distanced themselves from Remy. Sure, they weren't on good terms in private, but in public, they usually defended my brother or tried to skim over his horrible behavior. Because of that, they're also facing some exclusion from their social circle. Again, it feels like karma. The specifics of why Remy was arrested aren't that clear to me, and I didn't really bother to find out. Basically, in order to cover for the losses he was making, my brother hired a few shady accountants to window dress for him. I'm not an expert, but I think the term basically means making the company seem more successful than it is. He's currently undergoing trial, but it looks like everything he owns is going to be repossessed. After that, who knows? Apparently, he may end up in jail. Without the money to hire slick lawyers, like he did during Rosa's divorce, things don't look so good for Remy. Apparently, he even called my parents to ask for money, and to my disgust, they agreed to send him some. I don't think they're ever going to see it again. My parents have also gotten over all their misgivings about my time in Peru, seeing how happy I am. I guess the fact that I'm doing well at my job and being responsible with my money is also a bonus for them. But I'm still a little distant from them. I can't get over their lack of support when my brother was trying to attack me for helping Rosa. Like by now, almost everyone in the family will openly talk smack about Remy and the things he did. Sure, some of them kept their mouths shut when things were bad, but I'm still happy that they aren't living in fear of him anymore, although it's tough to be fearful of a businessman with no business. A few of them have even reached out to Rosa and apologized for not being there to help her when everything was going down. She's been graceful in accepting their apologies, but I'm sure that's also going to be a hurdle that we'll have to cross. So, that's how I ended up with my brother's wife. Even now, when I talk about it with people who don't know the whole story, I get strange looks. I get it, I really do. The way I ended up with Rosa is weird, wonky, and definitely not ideal. But at the same time, the struggles we went through have made us both pretty confident about boundaries, respect, and what we want out of a relationship. She's taking this one day at a time, as am I. Besides, this isn't a sappy love story, it's just what happened.